Hi, welcome to the New Voting Project. My name is Kunal, your host. I'm back at it again. Not with the white vans though, because this is a political podcast. And today we're here with Patrick Mehler, a student at Cornell University and president of the executive board at Cornell Votes, a nonpartisan organization dedicated to spreading awareness about local elections and voting rights. You're also director of elections for the Cornell Student Assembly, which is very cool. Thank you so much for being with us today, taking the time out. I understand college can be, what's the word, busy? That makes sense. But yes, thank you. We do appreciate your time.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me. I sincerely appreciate it.
Of course, of course. So yeah, let's get into these questions. Just for the first one, talk a little bit about your background. What got you inspired to pursue voting and join and almost create and found a rebirth, as you said, an organization, and touch on how your education at Cornell is preparing you for the responsibilities you have and are planning to have.
Sure. Yeah. So I guess I'll start with what got me involved. A very, very long story short, Cornell Votes was a fellowship at the university in January of 2020. In March of 2020, the world ended, as it did for everybody.
Right.
And my fellowship and hundreds of others were canceled and stopped being funded due to COVID and all sorts of things. But in March of 2020, there was still a November 2020 election that we cared about. And so myself and a couple of the other fellows turned our entire summer, we all had all of our different internships and jobs were canceled. And we took it upon ourselves to pick up the pieces of everything we had and rebuild Cornell Votes into this university-sponsored, really student-led and student-organized organization. And the whole purpose of it, like you were saying, is get students civically engaged at every level of government, all the way down from president of our student assembly all the way up to the president of the United States. It's paramount you vote everywhere. That's our whole motto, our whole spiel. I know you threw a lot of questions at me, so I'll answer, I think, the second one that was there, which was sort of what am I doing academically? I'm in the labor school, industrial and labor relations at Cornell University. So I particularly study arbitration, mediation, alternative dispute resolution. The quickest way I can explain that is it's everything in the legal field that isn't litigation or corporate. So, for example, you can't sue your phone carrier because you've signed away your rights in those contracts. Instead, you'll go to arbitration. And so that's what I study, is figuring out how does arbitration work in our world? How does it impact people, repeat player problem, all sorts of fun things like that. But what ILR really teaches me and what my major really is how to manage people. And it's a leadership major, is another way to say it. And so I've used every single thing I've learned in my education and turn it around and put it into the different orgs that I run the next day. I mean, like I'll take I had to take an HR class. And so it's like, oh, if you do this, your employees will respond better. All right, let's try it. Put in the next day. Hey, employees are responding better. Like 2 days later, this is fantastic. So a lot of what I study is people and leadership. All of those things directly translate right back into voting, right back into managing different voting orgs, managing our elections, and all the sort of fun stuff.
All right. And you're now a sophomore at Cornell.
I'm going to be a junior.
You're going to be a junior.
A week. Yeah.
A week. Yikes. Like 2 weeks before my school starts. So I'm going to be a senior, man. God. Anyway.
Look, man, that's all that means is you're getting closer and closer to being allowed to vote in more things.
True. My first election is next year. I'm pre-registered. I'm a poll worker. I'm working towards it in the primaries. I'm also working on several campaigns that'll be on the ballot. So that'll be interesting. So yeah, thank you for that. And I guess the reason we're having this interview, like we were talking about, is that you recently testified in the New York State legislature regarding your experiences voting. And I guess my next question is that what drew you to enter the political sphere? You recently interned for a state legislator in New York State. What kind of drew you to the political landscape? Was it organizing, activism? Talk a little bit about your roots in politics.
Yeah, so prior to that fellowship, I had done nothing in politics whatsoever. I've lived in New York my whole life. I'm from downstate. I go to school in upstate. I have lived, worked, and studied in both the rural, suburban, and urban areas of our entire state. So I had understanding of how everything worked, but wasn't involved whatsoever. And Cornell Votes is really the thing that threw me into politics. I learned very quickly in trying to get 23,000 people out to vote. Well, you need to know what they're voting for. You need to learn what are the different orgs out there, what different types of candidates exist, how does all the different governments work, how do counties versus cities versus states versus federal. And so when I was really helping to rebuild Cornell Votes in the June 2020 primaries, actually, I had voted by mail in March while I was at school. And this is what I was testifying about was my good friend Leo, who's, been one of my best friends since I was like 5. He tried to vote in the June 2020 primaries, and it took 4 hours for him to vote. Like from leaving his house to getting back to it was an almost 5-hour excursion. And all sorts of reasons why that's a problem, besides the part where there was multiple breaches of state law, besides the part where there was multiple instances and where we weren't respected, weren't treated fairly, and intentionally tried to deny my friend the right to vote. And that really opened my eyes a lot to how big of an issue voting rights is. Because prior, at that point, I was 19. I had voted by mail most of my time because I was at school. But the 2 times I hadn't voted by mail at that point, my public school is 5-minute walk from my house. I would walk there, 15 minutes to vote. At most, maybe you wait 5 more minutes so that you get that sticker, and then 5 minutes back home. Voting was never more than 30 minutes for me. And then I tried, and he's like, okay, well, let's help my friend do it. It took 4 hours. And the lesson that taught me is that for so many people throughout the country and in New York, there's genuine impediments to how people can vote. And so I've sort of honestly took it upon myself, but said, that's where I can help and make a difference. That's where I can help and make people's lives better, is by helping them to vote.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a damn good story. Yeah, not much I can say to that. Wow, 4 hours in New York State, huh?
There's a whole play-by-play in that testimony, but the short of it was, we go to his polling site and they say, hey, your polling site's wrong. You're not registered to vote. Well, here's the card that says I'm registered to vote, and this is my polling site. Let me vote. No, you got a problem. You need to go, 20-minute drive away to the Board of Elections. Fine, we go there. Wait for an hour. Hey, we want to vote. No, sorry, we got to wait for the commissioner. It's like, now hold on. I've read the entire 800-page New York State election law. There are very few under 20-year-olds who have. He has the right to vote affidavit. We don't have to sit here and wait for anything. Let him vote. You need to sit. You have to wait for the commission. You have to wait for the commissioner. We sit and wait there for 2.5 hours, filling out some made-up form every 15 minutes. Commissioner never comes. Eventually, he writes a letter to a judge. He's allowed to go back to Mount Vernon and vote with this manila envelope with 20 random pieces of paper in it. We looked through it, and it's like, none of this is even in the election law. I've read this whole thing. I know what this looks like. Bring it back, and he eventually votes at like 5 p.m. when we had left his house at noon. Wow. So it's crazy. I mean, June 2020 primaries were crazy for everybody because of COVID, because of voting early, and all sorts of great turnout reasons. But very frustrated with how long that took. And so I've tried to turn that frustration into action.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess as now you're you're president of the executive board at Cornell Votes. You also direct elections at the Cornell Student Assembly. What are your policy objectives? What are the values you're trying to amplify and accomplish? Is it to create more civic engagement within the student populace? Is it to have a more active student assembly? Like, how far are you going to take your current roles? And where do you see yourself going?
Sure. So I can very quickly speak to the SA stuff, our student assembly. So the president of the SA, who I was friends with in October of 2020, because Cornell Votes was, went from basically not existing to a powerhouse on campus, and that, I don't want to say household name's the wrong term, but right. People knew what it was, knew what we were doing, and saw us. And the SA had just finished its elections and had the lowest turnout it had ever had in its 50-year history. And so the president sort of came to me and said, hey, I know you're a nice guy, but you also seem competent to know what you're talking about and trying to get people out to vote. Do you want to come and manage our elections and increase turnout? I went, yes, that is exactly what I'd like to do. More than happy to. So I, was unanimously appointed in February, and we were running, there's a 23,000 student constituency. Like, I joke that I manage elections bigger than some of the counties in New York State, and they get a full board of elections. I get, more homework. And so so ran that, we had a 33% increase in turnout from all the different strategies and all the different things that we did to get people to turn out. But yeah, I mean, for me, the thing that matters the most is that you're civically engaged. It's just as you said, everything we do is nonpartisan. Most of what I do is nonpartisan. It's more important that you elect people that you care about and will serve you than any party line can draw. And so my biggest issue, concern, whatever you want to call it, is everybody has a right to say what's going on in their lives through government. And so you should exercise that right. And it's not as easy as saying, oh, we'll just go vote, right? Because what I've learned, at least in the past year and a half, such as that 4-hour story, there are monumental barriers that intentionally are made to restrict people from voting. And there's no need for that. At least I don't think there's no need for that. And so whatever we can do to help make voting easier, to make voter registration easier, to make the process of being involved in your community easier, it's only going to produce good things.
Right. Now let's talk about 2020. You had mentioned, once in a century pandemic, pandemonium, I guess that's the right? See that SAT vocab, there it is. What lessons do you think you learned from that 2020 election, top to bottom at any level? And what did it teach you? Because it seems like after 2020, you've become, activated and motivated to get involved. So what are your takeaways?
Sure. So I should preface just one quick thing of that. All of the actual data for like turnout numbers for college students hasn't come out yet. It's going to come out. There's this thing called the NSOLV report that Tufts released.
I have a quick interruption. I have the NSOLV director coming on in the next couple
minutes. Fabulous. Yes, all those folks at Tisch College and at Tufts are phenomenal. They're wildly busy right now trying to deal with all of our other colleges turnout numbers.
I'm aware, yes.
So we don't have the exact numbers yet. So I can't tell you immediately what strategies worked and what didn't work and what we learned that way. What I can tell you, though, is it at least looked like it. And looking at seeing how many more people were trying to go through us for absentee ballots, how many people were trying to go through us for early voting. And one way we do know that the strategies and the turnout things that we did, we know they work, is because they worked in student government 2 months later. Like everything that I did for our student assembly elections to increase turnout is what we did for the national and state elections in that fall. So, I guess in terms of your strategies, things that I learned that work is being accessible, just letting people know that you exist and you can help them solve a problem will help them solve that problem. Most people just need, that slight little push that says, man, I don't really understand this absentee crap. Like, what am I supposed to do? Don't worry. We've literally got a workshop every other day for 100 straight days. Like, tell us what you need and we're here to help you do it. So I guess that was the first thing I learned. The second thing I learned is that people care. Like the turnout numbers, even if they're not, we don't have the college specific ones yet, turnout went so much higher. We had so many people, over 100 million people voted early in something that most of them hadn't even done before. College students vote early by mail all the time, but the entire country learned what absentee voting was and learned what voting early was. So I guess the second thing that I learned was people care. People are passionate. The idea that voters, and especially young people, are just disinterested or apathetic to what's going on couldn't be farther from the truth. People are incredibly interested. I mean, you hosting this podcast is proof enough that people are interested.
Yeah, and to add on to that, most of the time when those in power refer to those folks being disinterested and not old enough in some cases, we're going to address that issue a little later on. It's mainly because those groups that they're discussing are disenfranchised, mainly because of the legislation they passed to do so. So, it's kind of a cyclical pattern. But yes, do continue about 2020.
Yeah, well, and I think the sort of that last thing then, because, mentioning legislation earlier, the third thing I think I learned is that we can make change, right? I know HR 1 and all that stuff at the federal level is a little more stalemated, but at the state level, people thought New York was like this bastion of voting rights. New York's laws hadn't been changed in 50 years for voting and were more outdated than 46 other states in the country. Like our voting laws were garbage in 2018 for that election. But the legislator really got their act together. The entire state Senate and state assembly, There's now going to be a referendum on our ballot this fall about like having the Constitution be permanently amended for no excuse absentee voting. We had no excuse absentee voting because of COVID. They had early voting was expanded like crazy. Same day registration finally came around. Automatic voter registration passed both the houses and was signed by the governor in December, and that's going to start to include a lot of college students. So what's shown to me is change is possible, and not is it possible, it's happening right now. So, I mentioned a little earlier, I think before we recorded, was that I was working for the state Senate this past summer, and that's part of what I was doing was seeing, how is legislation written and how does this work? Because we can do more, right? The legislation for automatic voter registration that's going to be helping a ton of college students. At the moment, it's only going to be helping SUNY students. That's 600,000 more people who are going to automatically be registered to vote, and that's fantastic. However, there's another 600,000 in private schools, in Cornell and Syracuse and Columbia and Fordham and Pace, who aren't included. I think they should be included, and so we're working on legislation to do that. And that third lesson is change is not only possible, it's happening. So we can influence that change, and we should.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah. Yeah, we should definitely do that. That's pretty good. Yeah, changing legislation is you make it sound really easy. The time it's quite bureaucratic. I don't know. We probably ran into that hurdle once or twice, maybe every day. Just depends on how high up you go. But yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, thank you for your input. Now my next question is very simple. How important is voting?
Paramount. It is essential. And now I want to preface one thing in that voting rights is the thing that I have chosen to sort of make the thing I want to champion, to make the thing that I want to make easier for people and to help with. Every single issue that exists out there is dependent on voting rights. Because if you can't vote for the legislators that care about the things you care about, then it's never going to get anywhere. I think a great example is climate change, right? So massive problem, the UN report that came out the other week, code red, every sort of thing. I care a lot about the environment, but I am by no means anywhere close to a qualified person to tell you what the right next steps are or what we should do. And I really can't do much more than defer to the experts. But voting rights is the thing that allows you to put those experts into power and allows you to make those experts the decision makers when it comes to climate policy. And it's the same thing for every single thing that you might be passionate about. If you're passionate about gun rights, that's great. But if the 25 people in your county legislator who decide the county's rules, they don't care what you have to say if you don't vote. I mean, one of the biggest things that blows my mind is if you've ever run for any office or you speak with some maybe lower level elected officials, the first thing that they do is they go to their board of elections and they ask for the voter rolls. You don't get voter rolls for folks who aren't registered to vote. Politicians don't spend time campaigning or even trying to attract voters that aren't registered. So you can't solve those bigger issues of climate change and gun issues and everything and anything until you put the people you want to solve those issues into power. And that comes back to voting rights.
Right. And the right to vote, it's 18 or older. I'd just like to ask, do you think 16, 17-year-olds, like I said, I'll be voting in my first election when I'm 18, in some select cities and municipalities, I know in Berkeley and Oakland, I also know in Maryland, there's something called the youth vote. 16-year-olds can vote in their, school board elections, in some cases, their municipal races. Do you agree with the notion that the right to vote should be expanded to the younger generations?
Well, before I think you even get to expanded, I think you need to get to realized. Like the 26th Amendment is supposed to allow 18-year-olds to vote, yet there's still millions of ways where that is suppressed. Like my entire job is still trying to realize just the rights of the 26th Amendment to allow 18-year-olds to vote, whether that be, Tennessee laws about you need a notary to sign your absentee ballot, even though you're using the absentee ballot because you're at school in New York and not home in Tennessee. Sure. Like things like that are crazy to me, that there's still so much to be done, even just for, used to be 21, used to be 18-year-olds. I know there's a lot of movement, especially with primaries of, if you're 17 in February, my birthday's in February, and, there's an election in June, but the primaries in January, right?
Right.
Well, you're going to vote in that election anyway. You should have a say in the primary, right? So I know that's getting a lot of traction. There's all sorts of other issues with primaries, primaries and all that sort of stuff. I personally think 18 is the right age to start allowing for federal and most statewide offices. I know that there's a couple of things like the cities you were saying, like the school board is something that makes a lot of sense to me of like, these are kids who are right in the heart of it. They will know a lot more about what's going on and what could be fixed if you give them the chance to. I look at New York a lot because this is something that we focus on with Cornell Votes is about lowering the voting rights. I personally think 18 is a perfect number for New York, just because for our state to be either a state senator or a state assemblyman, you just have to be 18, right? For Congress, you need to be 25, for the Senate, you need to be 30, for president, for 35. But at 18 in New York State, that is no matter, 18 or 88, you can now be a part of the state legislature. And to me, that makes perfect sense. And that's the time you could start to influence who gets put into the state legislature. But even if not actually voting is until 18, there's still millions of ways, and I'm looking at you especially, to be involved and really impact the process beyond your individual right to vote, right? It's going to come. You're going to get it. You'll age, hopefully.
Right.
And hopefully. But there's still so many ways to get involved. There's still so many ways to be a part of government and civic education. But that sort of 18 being the time to vote, that's when you start to pay your Social Security taxes. That's when you start to. I live in a city where there's a city income tax. That's where your income starts to get taxed by the city. I know in most places, at least I didn't get my driver's license until after I was 18. So 18 is sort of a big rite of passage year. Lowering it to 16 federally, I'm not sure how beneficial that would be until really we should also be thinking about 18 to 25, like that age group votes at so much lower terms. And it's not because of anything other than intentional suppression against them. Because it's the same, because I guess here's another way to look at it. If you look at Gen X, who was able to vote at 18, they're voting at pretty high rates at the moment. They're voting at pretty moderate rates compared to everybody else. So it's not a generational issue of, oh, the young generation doesn't want to vote. It's something's in the way from stopping young people, regardless of their Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, or I don't know what the new one's going to be called, but they're going to be eligible to vote in 10 years.
They should just call it, why can't they start at Gen A, like A, B, C? That would be so much easier to follow.
Exactly. So whatever's after our generation, whoever born after 2000, I think 6 and later, like they're going to be eligible to vote very soon. And it's not a generational issue. It's a youth issue of there are very intentional ways they try to prevent us from having that right to vote.
Right. Yeah, there are many barriers. That's actually my next question. We look at states like Georgia, Texas enacting voter suppression laws, targeting certain community minority groups. You can't give out a bottle of water if you're a poll worker without getting punished, much less participate or want, have accessibility at absentee ballots and polling locations. And, the list goes on, and there, I think about estimated 400 voter suppression laws in the United States after the 2020 election. What are your thoughts? Why is this happening? What do you say to it? Maybe what's going on in New York State? You had mentioned some legislation compiled there. And what can Gen Z, what can our generation do about it?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing with sort of the restrictive bills is I think a lot of it, you can sort of see right through the lies, I would say, of what it is trying to do. Like, for example, I was reading this morning, I think the Texas Senate officially passed their bill to restrict voting rights. And I was looking at it, and the two big things that they were focusing on was, besides the absentee limitations and the 24-hour voting limitations, one thing that they intentionally got rid of was drive-in walking, like not walking to the place voting. Now, there was a whole court case with Harris County right when the election was happening where they tried to throw out 125,000 ballots. If what they were caring about was the security of the elections, then why would you focus on something that is the only choice for people to vote? So I published this whole paper it's going to be published next month, but I wrote it a while ago about voters with disabilities and how for almost all voters with disabilities, there's not a single place in some of these states that are ADA compliant for somebody to be able to vote in.
Interesting.
Right? So being able to walk curbside voting is so important for folks in wheelchairs, for folks with any sort of back issues. Like that is the only way they can vote because these boards of elections in states haven't put in the infrastructure to let them vote in the first place.
Right.
So something that concerns me like crazy is you're taking away voters with disabilities' only avenue to vote. We're skipping past for a minute how hard it is for them just to register and do everything in the first place. They finally make it on election day to the polling site. And now they're turned away because they think that somebody in a wheelchair is going to try and vote for 17 people from their minivan.
Right.
And to me, the thing that I see is like, if you really cared about voter protection, the first thing you would do is realize those rights, as I was talking about before, for all the folks that it hasn't been realized for yet. Right. So there's so like the whole absentee ballot restrictions. A lot of them, if you look at it, are not even like they're just direct violations of the 65 Voting Rights Act. Now that's getting struck down like crazy with every other Supreme Court case. But the thing that just, worries me the most is in this whole effort to make elections safer beyond the fact that there's basically no election fraud, the thing that they're doing to make them safer is literally preventing millions of people from voting. And if what you're doing is preventing millions of people from voting who are legally entitled to and, are in every sense of the way allowed to, then something else is going on, right? It's clearly not about voter protection. It's either about trying to keep the power, trying to cut out certain individuals on purpose. I worry about a lot of these states that still have partisan commissions that draw their lines with the census data that came out yesterday.
Right.
New York, thankfully, after 250 years, is now going to be using an independent commission. But, the way I see it at the moment is you're drawing all of these lines to intentionally gerrymander people. And then even once you've made their vote diluted enough, you're trying to find ways to stop them from even having that diluted vote. And to me, it's a direct violation of what it means to like be an American. Like part of being an American is voting. Part of being a patriotic American is being a part of your country. And the best way that you can do that comes literally every year in the form of voting. And anything that's restricting that right to vote, anything that is further burdening folks to vote, I can't see the rationale. I can't see what the positive rationale behind that is.
Yeah. And I was actually going to point out, I don't know, there are certain ADA rules, right? I don't know if voting applies, but shouldn't voting rights also be ADA compliant with the Disabilities Act? And that's just an impending court case.
They're supposed to be.
Yeah,
They're supposed to be. Yeah, the GAO put out this full report in 2013. I want to say they did a sample of a couple thousand polling sites throughout the entire country.
Mhm.
And it was something like 30% were clean and 67% had at least one problem that would have fully restricted somebody from voting. And part of it too, beyond the part where the ADA has all its other issues and it still doesn't protect a lot of people with disabilities. Just because something is ADA compliant doesn't also mean that it's actually accessible too.
Right.
Like the lines for ADA compliant over 32 years ago are different from what is needed now. I mean, like a small example that people don't think about at all is for blind voters, right? If you think of a public school, what's in the hallways besides all the lockers? There's these jutouts of water fountains. Now, your kid in school, yeah, you see the water fountains coming at you, but if there's these random things of metal that bump out at you when you're trying to go and vote, you could get seriously hurt, right? And if you don't have the proper pathways, you don't do all sorts of things to make it easier for people with disabilities to vote. Again, it's the largest voting bloc in the entire country is people with disabilities.
Wow.
1/6 of all Americans have some disability, and they're just pushed to the side. And all these things that are trying to make elections safer are making it even harder for them to vote.
Right. Well, damn.
Yeah, sorry.
I never thought of the ADA perspective. No, I didn't think of folks with disabilities. Most of the time when my parents don't have, everybody's working a 9 to 5 or something, they just go drop off their ballot. If they have the time, they'll go to the location, and fill it out there. But most of the time you're dropping in. Last year's election, we're mailing it. But yeah, for the folks who drive in, drop it off, if you're taking that away from a potential voter, then you are in turn acting in antithesis to what American democracy is supposed to be, free, right?
Exactly. Democracies need voters.
Yeah,
Democracy needs voters.
you're removing a freedom to act on somebody's wishes, on an opinion, on your voice. And I mean, I could take that all the way to the First Amendment. That's my freedom. That's my freedom of speech. It's my freedom to act, of choice. Anyway, I should really bring on a constitutional professor on the show to really discuss that.
Well, if you want one fun constitutional thing, there's nowhere in the Constitution is the right to vote. Like in the original Constitution and in the first 10 amendments, at no point is the right to vote there.
Wow. Yeah, but with the 26th Amendment, the
26th Amendment and the 19th and the 14th and the 13th do a couple of things as well. But it's this whole issue of voting is such a center cornerstone of being an American and being in our democracy. But there's a lot of ways that it was intentionally written not to be originally. And so it's our job to continue to expand that and to continue making that more accessible.
Right. Yeah, no, I just realized, I've studied American history for a long time in school. And there's often a critique of the Constitution being a conservative triumph, right? You could point to, slavery, you could point to the 3/5 compromise, you could, originate that. Was it really free, or was it benefiting the plantation slave owners and wealthy aristocrats in Virginia? And the more I think about it, if they, it kind of adds to that, right? It's evidence that if there was no reference in any of the constitutional articles or the first Bill of Rights, right, of voting, was the country meant to be for everybody? And what it is, and is it what we now believe to be American democracy, right? Was that just some fantasy? Anyway, this could be really long and
no, it's all good. I'll sum it up quickly and just say, but that's our job. I know you said Gen Z before, but youth, elderly, everything in between, it is our job to realize and make perfect what was an imperfect dream, right? It is our job to really make this country as democratic and open and free as possible, right? It is our job to make this as welcoming and inclusive of a country as we can. That is what, it's what we've adopted. Even if we didn't start that way, that's our end goal is, we want everybody to have a better life. You want your community to be better. You want to be better, right? And so we're still working towards that. We're still working towards it. That's why we're here. I would be retired or maybe just studying and not doing all this work if we had already reached that.
Yeah, probably studying.
So we're working towards it. We're working towards that.
Yeah, that's good. Any aspirations for office?
At some point in the future.
You're 20. 20?
How old am I? I'm 20. Yeah, I'm 20 at the moment. So I've got hopefully at least 60, 70 more years to make some decisions. The immediate, it's looking like law school. I think that's the next step, is probably law school. I've been spending time speaking with election lawyers and learning about what, beyond reading it and writing legislation, but really learning what our election law looks like in this country. And I'd love to go and start actually fixing it. There is, beyond the 50 states in the federal things, there are so many voting laws throughout this whole country that desperately need some attention and desperately need some professionals. So we'll see. 5 years from now, I might be one of those professionals.
That'd be good. We'd love to have you back on the show. When you're that professional, don't forget about the little guy. But yes, in closing, what would you recommend to Gen Z? Teens who want to get involved, teens who, don't really care about voting, but they're looking, they're engaged, they're watching the news. What do you tell them?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is keep staying engaged, right? Keep being involved, get involved civically everywhere you can. I personally do things at the nonpartisan level. I know we were speaking a little about what you do. You don't have to do it at a nonpartisan level. If you really care about the Working Families Party and that is the one thing you want to bolster like crazy in your community, run for it. do it. Run for office as a working families person. Do it and save the world. Like, there's tons of ways for everybody to get engaged, especially Gen Z. If you're in college, I spent almost the entirety of my spring semester helping hundreds, literally hundreds of folks at different universities start to set up their voting rights orgs, right? Like Cornell Votes was a massive success. We got national awards at the end of the fall semester and all these great things. And people have recognized that, enough that I guess that you figured out who I am somehow. But we found, I spent time with kids throughout the entire country helping them set up their voting orgs, right? There was a guy in Vermont I was helping maybe like a month ago, some folks in Colorado at Brown, and Harvard's been doing great. Like, there is a voting org at almost every single college at this point, who are always looking for help, who are always looking for more passionate people and are looking for the next leaders. I'll put in a short plug if you're interested in Cornell Votes. Please let me know. More than happy to chat with you.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
if there isn't at wherever school you end up going to, start it. Be that person who revitalizes civic engagement at your campus. Start talking with administrators, start talking with their students, and you can really start to make the difference, even if you're not 18 yet.
Yeah. Well said. You sound like me when I used to be younger, something like that. No, and yeah, you were just about to plug your Twitter and Cornell Votes, anything, how can folks?
Oh, sure. So
It'll be in the
not
description.
yeah, not very active on Twitter, but at Cornell Votes for all of our Instagram. At Cornell University for all sorts of things as well. You'll see us spotlighted from here and there. Personally, you'll find me just about everywhere at patrick.j.mailer. That's about everywhere. But yeah, I mean, thanks so much for having me. I sincerely appreciate it. It's been fantastic.
Of course, yeah. Anytime you want to come back, become an expert, come back on the show. Let us know what you learned. It was really great to have that, collegiate, civic empowerment that you're obviously leading right now. So we wish you the best of luck with that. And I think this perspective of, you being also a peer to this generation, well, it is helpful. You're leading us through the fire and the hurricanes and the storms and the earthquakes and then the laws too. Yeah, you're going there as well. So yeah. Thank you very much.
Always could use more support. Always could use more folks who want to get involved and want to, I'm out of college in 2 years, right? Somebody else needs to take my spot and needs to take the spot of the other 400 leaders throughout the state who are doing similar work.
Exactly. Yeah, no. And I'm sure folks will step up. So yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, we wish you the very best of luck in your endeavors.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Of course, take care.